London doesn't just sparkle, it observes. Behind the glass skyscrapers, beneath the ancient cobblestones, and inside rooms closed off to the public, power moves in silence. We're not talking about politicians or influencers here. This is the kind of money that doesn't scream for attention. It's the cash that owns the dirt, dictates the market, and outlives everyone. Tonight, we're stepping into the shadows to track a network of families who've quietly engineered one of the biggest business empires the United Kingdom has ever seen. While the tabloids are busy chasing the latest scandal, these dynasties operate on a whole different clock. We're talking decades, not fiscal quarters. Bloodlines, not brand names. You don't build this kind of wealth overnight, and you certainly don't advertise it. From the rubble of the post-war era to billion-pound dominance, every family in this story stuck to one ruthless playbook. Control the assets that generate power on autopilot. Real estate, infrastructure, leverage. The stuff you use every single day without having a clue who actually owns it. The scariest thing about these families isn't their bank balance, it's how invisible they are. You walk on their pavement, rent their office space, and shop in neighborhoods designed by their boardrooms, all without knowing their names. It's old world strategy updated for the modern world. Buy slowly, accumulate relentlessly, stay quiet. These families don't chase clout, the world comes to them. In this series, we're going to break down how these dynasties climbed up from nothing, how they navigated wars and recessions, and how they set themselves up to win regardless of who was in charge. This isn't a story about yachts or high scores on a spreadsheet. It's about legacy, total control, and the quiet mechanics of power shaping London from the inside out. Before we dive in, I've got a question for you. Where are you watching from? If you're in the UK, type the number 1 in the comments. US viewers, hit me with a 2. Everywhere else, type 3. And if you're into stories about secret empires and insane wealth, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. We're just getting started. Every empire starts with a gamble, and for London's heavy hitters, that moment usually happened far away from any luxury penthouse. Long before the private jets, there were crowded tenements, immigrant grinds, and high-pressure choices. What separates a dynasty from a one-hit wonder isn't luck, it's discipline. The foundations of these families were built on self-control, perfect timing, and an obsession with owning things rather than being seen. In post-war London, chaos was just opportunity in disguise. We're talking bombed-out streets and dirt-cheap land. While everyone else was just trying to survive, these families were positioning themselves. They understood a simple truth. When a city rebuilds, the people who own the dirt control the future. One by one, they shifted from small-time trades into assets you can't outsource, download, or replace. They were in no rush, no press releases. They'd buy properties and sit on empty buildings for years, just waiting for the perfect moment. Money was recycled with surgical precision, profits went right back into the pot, never blown on toys. It wasn't greed, it was strategy. The goal wasn't to look rich, it was to stay rich forever. They trained every generation to look past their own lifetimes and protect the structure above all else. As London turned into a global financial hub, these dynasties were already baked into the bedrock. Banks were built around them, corporations paid them rent, governments cut deals with them. And through it all, the public had no idea who they were. Real power doesn't need a round of applause. What you're looking at isn't just a pile of money, it's a blueprint, a model perfected over generations, proving that true dominance doesn't shout, it compounds. More money meant more complexity. This is where simple ownership turned into structural dominance. Shell companies, layers of partnerships, offshore holdings, these weren't just tricks to hide, they were shields. These families knew that as the empire grew, it became a bigger target. Privacy wasn't a luxury anymore, it was armor. By the time London became the center of global capital, these families were already 3 moves ahead on the chessboard. They diversified not because they were scared, but because they were smart. Real estate cash-funded moves into finance, shipping, and luxury goods. Risk was a math problem, not a feeling. They didn't bet the farm on one thing. They built ecosystems where a win in one sector quietly propped up another. Passing the torch became a science. Kids weren't just handed the keys to the kingdom, they were groomed for it. The education was specific. The exposure was controlled. The message? Wealth isn't a prize, it's a job. If you couldn't handle the weight, you were cut out of the decision-making loop. No questions asked. Blood gets you in the door, but competence keeps you in the room. Meanwhile, they kept their public image perfectly beige. No controversy, no politics, no drama. They didn't need you to like them. Their leverage lived behind closed doors, in the fine print of contracts and land deeds that lasted longer than any prime minister. That's how a dynasty survives, not just the economy, but history itself. At this altitude, it's not about making money anymore. It's about stability. Control is the currency. And silence? That's the strategy. Once the power was locked in, the new game was resilience. Markets tank, administrations flip, and public mood swings overnight. The survivors weren't the loudest, they were the most adaptable. These families learned to look at chaos and see a sale. Recessions were just shopping sprees. While everyone else retreated, they quietly expanded their footprint. Their relationship with risk set them apart. They never mistook arrogance for confidence. They used debt carefully, dragged out negotiations, and stress-tested every move against a total collapse scenario. The question wasn't, how much can we make? It was always, how much can we keep? That mindset let them absorb hits that wiped out the flashy new money. Then came the influence game. Universities, museums, foundations, they started putting their names on everything. It wasn't vanity, it was insurance. Strategic philanthropy bought them goodwill, access, and legitimacy. They knew that when things get rough, public trust is just as valuable as cash in the bank. Inside the house, things got strict. Every decision was logged, every protocol enforced. No emotions allowed. Casual dinner table chats were replaced by formal family councils. Advisors were vetted like they were joining the CIA. Nothing was left to impulse. This wasn't a family business anymore, it was a corporate institution with a last name. London started to look like a mirror of their success. Rundown neighborhoods they bought for pennies transformed into world-class hotspots. Rents went up, influence spread out, and through it all, the family's hand remained subtle, barely visible, but definitely permanent. As these empires matured, a funny thing happened. The richer they got, the less they felt the need to flex. Sure, they had luxury, but it was quiet and purposeful. Private estates replaced public splashing. They traded press appearances for private invites. At this level, status isn't about how many likes you get, it's about who takes your phone call. This was the shift from builders to caretakers. The mission became preservation. Legal walls went up. Trusts and holding companies ensured the money kept flowing no matter who was born or who died. The family didn't need a genius leader anymore. The system itself was the leader, built to run on autopilot. The world outside started moving at warp speed. Tech disrupted everything, and capital started flying around the globe in seconds. But these dynasties stayed grounded in the heavy stuff. Land, grids, essential services. Things that don't go out of style. Startups crash and burn, but the ground underneath them stays put. They didn't race the future, they just positioned themselves so the future had to pay a toll to pass through. Behind closed doors, they drilled the values home. Loyalty beats ego. Patience beats impulse. Play the long game. The younger generation was constantly reminded that one stupid move could torpedo decades of work. Wealth wasn't framed as a free ride, but as a duty, a burden just as much as a privilege. By now, the empire didn't need to grow to feel powerful. It had achieved something way rarer: inevitability. It was dug so deep into the city's foundation that you couldn't remove it if you tried. That's when wealth stops being something you see and starts being something that just is. At a certain altitude, it's not about stacking cash anymore. It's about positioning. This is where the real pros separate themselves from the lottery winners. A family at this level doesn't react to the news, they anticipate it. Every global shift, from interest rate hikes to migration flows, is modeled, discussed, and prepared for years before it even hits the headlines. London served as the ultimate pivot point, amplifying every advantage they held. Massive waves of capital poured in from Asia, the Middle East, and North America, and these families were positioned right at the bottleneck to catch it. They engineered deals that let foreign cash land safely while keeping the steering wheel firmly in local hands. To the average observer, it looked like standard business. In reality, these were calculated power plays to lock in dominance. That is exactly how a dynasty turns a map into a weapon. Most importantly, they dodged the bullet that kills most empires: being too famous. When their assets got too loud, they scrambled the signal. Ownership was fractured across shell companies. Management got outsourced. They spread their influence thin enough to be everywhere, but concentrated enough to stay untouchable. The goal wasn't to be the headline act, but the stage itself. A dynasty lasts longest when the system can't function without it, yet barely knows it exists. Behind closed doors, the pressure cooker was on. The bar was set impossibly high. Weak leadership, zero tolerance, no matter whose kid you were. If you lacked the grit, you were quietly shuffled away from the control room, usually toward charities or vanity projects. It sounds cold, but that internal ruthlessness wasn't about being mean. It was about staying alive. Generational money evaporates the second feelings start overriding standards. The result looked less like a household and more like a private corporation. Dinner tables turned into boardrooms. Decisions were governed by a playbook, not a pulse. Emotions were noted, sure, but never allowed to grab the wheel. By this phase, cash had morphed into something else entirely: power, quiet, layered, and practically bulletproof. By the seventh stage of control, the rest of the world started feeling the tremors, even if they couldn't pinpoint the epicenter. Laws got tweaked. Neighborhoods evolved. Whole industries shifted their pricing to accommodate assets they didn't even own. That is the invisible gravity a dynasty generates once it hits critical mass. They don't use force, they use necessity. People adapt because they have no other choice. The wildest part is how completely these families tuned out the noise. The 24-hour news cycle, Twitter mobs, political drama, none of it touched their strategy. A true dynasty operates on a different wavelength, filtering out the static. Short-term market jitters were ignored unless there was a bargain to be had, but long-term structural shifts, those triggered immediate moves. That selective attention span became their superpower. By now, they picked their partners with the precision of a surgeon. Governments and massive conglomerates came to the table knowing the deck was stacked. These families didn't scream for control, they just built the stadium so that them winning was the only logical ending. You rarely hear a wealthy family say a hard no. Instead, they just massage the terms until saying yes is the only option left. They kept their heads down by design. If they did step into the spotlight, it was usually through philanthropy, art, or schools, areas that polished their image without showing their hand. Writing big checks wasn't just about being nice. It bought influence, legitimacy, and a future. They knew that quietly molding society works a whole lot better than picking a fight with it. On the inside, the talk wasn't about profits anymore. It was about staying relevant. How do you keep an empire essential in a world that changes overnight? The playbook was simple. Evolve without selling your soul. Hold on to the assets that actually matter. Be patient. Stay silent. Let the world spin and just collect the rent while it does. Eventually, every giant faces the final boss: complacency. History books are littered with fortunes that crumbled not because they were attacked, but because they got comfortable. The bloodlines that stuck around knew this better than anyone. A dynasty that survives centuries is one that wakes up every morning paranoid about its own assumptions, even when they're winning. This era was all about upgrading the software without breaking the hardware. The core wealth stayed put, but the wrapper changed. Tech got folded in quietly. Gut feelings were swapped for hard data. The younger generation was told to poke holes in the old ways, but only within the guardrails. Innovation was greenlit, rebellion was not. Change was fine, but chaos was off the table. The heat from the outside turned up too. Regulators wanted answers. The media started digging. The public mood turned against the 1%. Instead of fighting back, these families just adjusted the blinds. Some vanished deeper into the shadows. Others controlled the narrative by sponsoring museums or think tanks. A smart dynasty doesn't tackle perception head-on, they just redirect the energy. What is crazy is how calm they stayed. Even with the spotlight on them, the levees held. Cash reserves were bottomless. Assets were spread out. Their lawyers had built fortresses decades before the first shot was fired. While everyone else panicked, these families just executed the code. Being prepared, not optimistic, was their armor. Mentorship became the killer app internally. The elders didn't just pass down passwords, they passed down judgment. Horror stories of past screw-ups were kept alive as warnings, not folklore. The young guns learned fast that the quickest way to torch a legacy is arrogance, thinking the rules don't apply to you. At this level, just staying in the game is the trophy. No fireworks, no parades, just standing tall while the world churns around you. That is the quiet mastery of the long game, where success isn't measured by how much you grow, but by the fact that you're still standing when everyone else has folded. As the decades rolled by, a profound truth emerged. The real win wasn't domination, it was endurance. Markets boomed and busted. Politics flipped. Industries went extinct. Yet these families stayed anchored, not because they had a crystal ball, but because they were built to take a punch without shattering. At this stage, a wealthy family is less like a business and more like a self-healing ecosystem. Outsiders usually read this stability wrong. Critics called them boring. Competitors called them stagnant. In reality, it was discipline. These guys knew that chasing every shiny object is a trap. Being picky was their sharpest knife. They only put money where they could control the outcome. Expanding without grip looked like weakness to them, not ambition. A dynasty survives by saying no 1,000 times for every yes. Behind the curtain, passing the torch reached its trickiest phase. Swapping leaders wasn't an emotional moment, it was a standard operating procedure. Power shifted by inches, watched like a hawk, and tweaked if needed. Mistakes were fixed before they hit the papers. The goal was a seamless handoff. A family that can swap CEOs without shaking the foundation has mastered the hardest art of all. Out in the world, their influence was just ambient. They didn't need to shout to negotiate. Their mere presence set the terms before the meeting even started. Banks designed products just for them. Cities planned skylines around their land. It wasn't a conspiracy, it was physics. Massive piles of capital warped the environment just by sitting there. By now, the money itself faded into the background. Relevance was the only currency that mattered. The ability to stay essential in a system that speeds up every year. And as the world hit the gas, these families did something counterintuitive. They tapped the brakes. Watching, waiting, letting the other guys run off a cliff. Because the ultimate cheat code of a wealthy family is patience, and patience, backed by real power, is undefeated. When we zoom out and look at the whole picture, one thing is obvious. Generational wealth isn't a lottery win. It is built on discipline, rigid structure, and thinking in decades, not quarters. The dynasties we looked at won because they treated money like a finely tuned engine, not a prize. A family that lasts cares less about getting bigger and more about staying solid, consistent, and relevant forever. The biggest takeaway here is human, not financial. These families knew that unchecked power eventually eats itself. That is why so many of them quietly poured money into schools, art, and society. Not for the applause, but for the balance. A dynasty that feeds the ecosystem it lives in has a way better shot at survival than one that just bleeds it dry. There is a personal lesson here, too. Behind every empire, there is sacrifice, intense pressure, and a weight you don't see on Instagram. Wealth cranks up the responsibility. The ones who made it weren't the loudest in the room. They were the most patient. A family that respects time, stays humble, and acts as a steward turns cash into a legacy instead of just excess. So whether you are building a startup, a career, or a future for your own kids, the rule is the same. Play the long game. Protect your base. Adapt without losing your soul, and never confuse being seen with being effective. Real power compounds in the quiet. If you dug this deep dive into elite dynasties and hidden empires, smash that subscribe button, like the video, and share it around. Drop your thoughts in the comments below.